Hello, everybody. Welcome to our new episode. We are going to be talking about words, language, and our understanding of the God idea. Start out really quickly, though, I just want to say that we are sponsored by the Institute of Metaphysical Science. It was established in 1959 as the Margaret Laird Foundation, researching, exploring, living, and teaching the science of being and the causal nature of consciousness. Our website is scientificmetaphysics.org. All right. And all of our sessions right now, what we've been talking about for the last several weeks, and we will continue to talk about a bit more, is all pulled from Margaret Laird's address called What is the Idea? And that's exactly what we're exploring. What is the idea? Okay. So truth is a constant demand for new seeing, new words, new expression. With words when words are the jailer of ideas, truth is lost in an old view. So constantly right now.
Mhm.
What is appearing in and as individual consciousness is a clearer vision of truth. Truth is continuously expressing because truth constitutes the nature of being. In this episode, we're going to be exploring words, ideas, and the God idea. Where does power, freedom, and full self-expression live? So that's what the exploration is tonight. Welcome, Betty. How are you?
Pretty good. Rushing around, but pretty good.
Excellent. Excellent. Anything you want to add to the subject tonight?
No.
Nope. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about, and we can dive right in. So, and what is the idea? In the pamphlet from Margaret Laird, on page 8, she said, or she wrote, one may say, I'm happy, but the verbal saying is not the state or experience of being happy. It's just words, right?
Yeah.
So,
if you don't really experience for yourself that you're joyous and happy and free, there
right,
isn't any joy and happiness and freedom
correct,
because you generate it in your experience of living.
right,
Yeah.
right. And then in Science and Health on 349.31, starting there, Mary Baker Eddy wrote, in the same idea, she wrote it this way: opponents of science believe substance to be matter as something and almost the only thing, and of the things which pertain to spirit as next to nothing, or as very far removed from daily experience.
Yeah. So
So
go ahead.
So she's talking about where we think that which we see around us, we give primary importance to. Is that basically what she's saying in that?
Yes, and she's also saying, I think the big thing different is conscious experience. If the individual is not consciously experiencing, nothing is happening. Pictures are flashing by, all kinds of stuff claiming to be, but nothing actually occurs unless there is an experience of it.
Well, when you say there's an experience of it, let's explore that a little bit. Because experience, I could be bored, I could be whatever. That's the experience of it.
Right. But you're mostly unaware. You mostly, human beings mostly think that what they see all around them is all that's going on and that it's going on exactly the way they see it. They don't even consider that the guy sitting in the chair next to them looking at the same stuff doesn't see what they see.
Right.
But human beings in general believe that what they see around them is what's so.
Yes.
And you deal with that and you're in fine shape. And science comes along and says, well, maybe so, maybe not. But there are times when you have negative experiences, I can put it that way, maybe, that you think there shouldn't be that way. It's not fair. I don't
Right.
like it that way. I'm not comfortable. I'm not going to put up with this. I can do something about it. And science says, yes, you can. And then you enter a whole different frame of reference, a whole different paradigm in which to explore who you are. Are you the two-legged thing that believes everything that flashes on the screen is exactly right and real and governs you? Or do you think there is some spark of living going on separate from that thing that's viewed out there? You know, when people come along and say, boy, I've got your number, I know you. You know, they don't know you. They don't know a thing about you. All they know is what they see on the surface. And that's not knowing you. That's observing something they're seeing.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a whole shift in how you live yourself with your perception of who you are. And key to that in the beginning of this part of the book that Margaret's written is conscious experience. Yeah, you might be experiencing a lot of things as a human being.
Right.
But are you consciously aware that the responsibility for the experience you're having is entirely up to you? No, it isn't. I can hear you saying that right now. No, it isn't.
No, what I was saying was in my better moments.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, that's it.
Right. All right. And then in your book, Mine is the Athlete, on page 131, you wrote, if I say it's black and I'm closed to any other possibility, for me, it's black, whether you agree or not.
Yep. And I live it as black.
Yeah.
And I would never believe anybody that said it's not black.
No, you'd think they were nuts. Can't they plainly?
Not only am I right, but I'm sure that I'm right.
Right.
And I love that quote from Mark Twain, who said that we don't have any problem with the stuff that we don't know, you know.
Right.
But it's the stuff that we know for sure that just ain't so.
Right. Right. Exactly. So that's exactly right. I mean, we see things from our perspective or point of view. We focus on that stuff and we wonder why everyone else can't see it the same way.
Right.
And they must be nuts. And maybe if I take it more slowly and step it through, that maybe that would get them to see it that way, etc. So I think that's something that probably almost everybody can relate to these days in the climate that we live in. I think it's par for the course right now.
Yeah, and a lot of what Mrs. Laird is teaching makes you want to stop and give a consideration for a few minutes to the possibility that there is something about you that's not ever observable on the human level, but it's there.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a power that helps you out along the way if you ever know how to access it.
Right.
But we don't access it very often.
Right.
So conscious experience is the key, really, to taking care of what's going on with your life.
Okay. And by conscious experience, you mean being consciously aware of the facts present in any situation.
Yeah. It's like, well, my little sentence about black. I'm closed to anything else. It's black. I know it's black. It's going to be lived as black. That's right. The way it is, black.
Right.
Okay. As long as I'm in that frame, there's no opening at all for any other possibility.
Correct.
But if black blinds me to the world that I'm living in, I'm going to grope around and say, wait a minute, I got to be able to see this better. Turn on a light somewhere, you know, and you grope long enough and the black becomes a little less black and you begin to squint and see a little gray of light here and there. And finally you say, it is possible that there's some other color.
Right.
And that little tiny possibility opens a whole new door.
Right.
And the thing that happens is that in your groping around and your upset and concern for doubting that it's black when you were so sure that it was black, all of that makes you a little timid about insisting on what's so another time. You kind of, that's sort of called a learning curve. The next time something comes up that you are really sure about, something clicks and you say, well, maybe so, maybe not. And that's a huge opening.
Right. But the distinction that I want to draw and talk to you about a little bit and suss out is it's not that you're wavering in your confidence. It's not that you're wavering in your esteem, right? Like it's not about that. It's about you being open to how things show up versus your just automatic point of view. You're starting to catch yourself. Well, maybe so, maybe not. Let me play with this. But you're not, it's not that you're timid about it or you're second guessing yourself. Is it? That would be more like a left turn, wouldn't it?
No, a lot of times your wake up call is a lot of timid stuff.
Okay.
Because you're not sure.
Okay.
You're just not really sure. But it is, it's a very humbling experience to find out that what you were dead right about just isn't so.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What am I going to do?
Right.
How am I going to, who am I?
Right.
Yeah. So there is that too. But the other thing is that along with that is a huge opening for something new to be possible in your life.
Right. But isn't it when you have that kind of wake up call and you're kind of like, okay, and you're open, things start to show up that before you could never see.
That's right.
That have always been right there, but you've been blind to them only from the standpoint that because while the world's black, well, no other color exists.
Yeah. And the thing, I can speak a lot from authority on this particular subject because the thing about being so darn sure about everything is that when you discover that it isn't that way, you don't have a leg to stand on. And it's really humbling. Yeah. But the gold star comes when you discover that there's a whole world out there that you're now discovering that you never knew existed.
Right.
So it becomes a blessing in disguise. An angel entertained unawares, in Mary Baker Eddy's words.
Exactly. Yeah. I would say, when you start to see that, if you're really open, you start to see things differently. You're now in a different world. And you may be a little bit timid, but I always, one thing that is clear is that I've gotten to where I don't argue with that I have an opinion about something. And people, if they ask me, they're going to hear the opinion that I've got. You know what I mean? It's like if they ask me, here you go. But it's not like I'm married to the opinion. So what I say laughingly, when people say, well, you were sure about this. And I go, well, until I'm not.
That's right.
And they look at me like I'm a nut, but it's like, okay, until I'm not. And so it's not that I'm dead set on it. It's that I have an opinion. It's the way that things seem to be for me. So I share that, but absent any other opening there, there's always room,
So what you're pointing out is there are degrees of this certainty.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
Yeah. And I've been at several extremes of both ends.
Right. I know. Don't I know it? All right. So, all right. So moving on to the next quote on page 8, also on What is the Idea? Mrs. Laird wrote, the impersonal science view is the discernment of spiritual facts, wherein every problem, every contradictory state of mind and body are identified as God. the life principle functioning.
Yeah. So she's pointing out the science view.
Yeah.
We look and we see what we think we see. But the science view, you see, that's the life principle functioning.
Right.
So what would that look like, given that the God idea is not something I can see, feel, hear, taste, or touch? So it's not visible. I don't know a whole lot about it. But that's what's functioning. So then I think, well, what do I know about the God idea? What do I know about this life principle?
Right.
What does that mean? So, okay, it's not the way I said, it's the life principle functioning. What does that mean? And there I am.
Well, can it mean that life shows up exactly as it's showing up? That it's perfect, exactly the way it's showing up? That it could show up no other way?
Could, but I don't know that. See, one of the things that science talks about are all of the synonyms that Mary Baker Eddy had for the God idea. Because when she was first introducing science to the world, the God idea wasn't even a God idea. There was a God, and he was up there, and he was sitting judgment on everything we did, and he was determining many things, and there was no arguing with the God. God said, and that was it. So she wanted to introduce the idea that there is nobody separate out there somewhere sitting in judgment on mankind. That God, the whole idea of God, is an idea, and it has a whole symphony of realities surrounding it. And she named 7 of them. She named life and truth and love and mind and soul and principle and spirit. And of course, none of these things are visible. They're not anything I can put my hand on and say, I'm going to take a bunch of that and a bunch of that. It isn't, they aren't tangible that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is workable with this God idea when it doesn't make any sense in my human living at all?
Right.
So science comes along and introduces ideas for you to consider that just might open up a whole realm of power and presence and beauty and joy that you never knew existed. So we invite you to explore.
Right. Okay. And in Science and Health, starting on page 194, line 32, Mary Baker Eddy wrote, "It has been demonstrated to me that life is God. I cannot fail to discern the coincidence of the spiritual idea of man with the divine mind."
Yeah, the coincidence of the spiritual idea of man, that would be something you can't see. The spiritual idea would have to be God related, and it's something I can't see. I can't grab hold of it. I can't push it around. I'm not sure anybody else can see it.
Right.
But it is the coincidence of that idea, and imagine that coinciding with divine mind. Well, divine mind is a God-related mind. It's divine, not human. So there's another thing I can't touch, feel, grab hold of. And so I'm sitting here thinking, Mrs. Eddy says there's a coincidence between this idea of man and this divine mind, which would be divine intelligence, divine knowledge, all knowing, all powerful, etc. And I'm thinking, I don't know where I fit in, because I still am saying, I, Betty. And she didn't say that Betty fit in anyway. you know?
Right.
So then I'm left with this spiritual idea. Where is it? I don't know where it is, but it is coincident with divine mind.
Yeah.
Okay, now what?
Yeah. And that's the grappling. That's the science.
Yep.
And in your book, Mind as the Athlete, on page 131, you wrote, the shifting view apparent as human existence and the living experienced relative to that view are entirely consistent for each individual. In other words, it makes sense. It's logical.
Given who you're being, this
Yeah.
is exactly the way things should show up for you.
Right. So they have to. That's what I was saying earlier. It's the way it looks is no accident.
That's right. And so you have a great opening to explore.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it and you say, I didn't do anything to deserve that, not my fault, all of that,
Yeah.
then you're kind of resistant to the idea that you got exactly what you're growing in your world by your own consent.
Yes.
Well, I didn't agree to that. Well, yes, you did, because it wouldn't be there otherwise.
Right.
So then we take that bit of information and you say, well, then how do I fix this thing so it's more in tune with these other possibilities that sound a little less jolting? And then I remember Mrs. Laird was really funny. She said, I want you to know that you can't fix the concept with the concept. So if you're trying to fix Betty with your good ideas about how Betty should be, forget it. It won't work.
Right.
And it takes a bit of doing to get to the point where you say, wait a minute, what do I do with Betty? And the fact is, you don't do anything with Betty. You leave her alone.
Mm-hmm.
You let her stew in her juices. But that's not who you are. Because this non-visible, non-tangible, can't see it, can't feel it, can't touch it, can't taste it, divinity, divine presence that has you exist, that's where all the peace and joy and power reside.
Right.
And you always have it. It's always available to you because it constitutes you. And the only thing that between you and having that experience is your real belief that Betty is who you are. When you let that go, oh, what else is possible?
Right.
And the thing that happens, and I just might as well say it because it's what we've observed all this time. What happens when you have that aha moment is that Betty, who is so determined, becomes more agreeable to be around. Something happens to Betty that shifts the way she behaves, and she's a little easier to live with. And she doesn't even know it. She doesn't know when the shift occurs or if it occurs. Right. But in being consciously aware that divine being is present whenever Betty shows up, wherever Betty shows up, right, always present, and you relax into that a bit, then what happens to Betty doesn't concern you at all, but it all does happen. She finds herself changed a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And not by deliberate efforting, right, but more like that's what happens, because actually the language world, not just Betty, but the language world we walk through, the car we drive, the house we live in, the neighbors across the street, the friends that call on the phone, all of that, every bit of that conforms to the belief you have about who you are. And when you're standing as divine principle, functioning perfectly, and leaving Betty alone, then the language has to report to you what you are being. And if you're not being that determined Betty thing, it disappears.
Yeah.
And whatever you're being now shows up.
Right.
And it's like a huge shift that you're not aware half the time, or 3/4 of the time, or 9/10 of the time.
Right.
You're not aware that anything's happening to Betty at all until somebody comes along and says, gosh, I hardly know you. You know, somebody you haven't seen for 5 years, and they'll say, I never knew you were fun to be around.
Yeah.
But that's the way it happens.
Yeah.
Because the divine precedes the human.
Yes.
And I can't see you because something happened here.
Okay. You probably hit a window. So moving on, we'll go right into what is the idea again on page 8, where Margaret wrote, one may say, I can't suffer because, but that saying, you just joined again.
What's that?
You just joined again. Exit. Okay. I kicked you out. You can join twice. So just stay put.
What do I do?
Just stay put. Don't worry about a thing. You're fine. You just can't see anything right now because you have a window in front of it. All right. So what is the idea on page 8? Margaret Laird wrote, one may say, I cannot suffer because, but that saying is not the experience of not suffering. The experience of not suffering lies in the understanding that God is conscious experience, whatever you may call it.
Yep.
And that's a lot of what we've been talking about.
Exactly.
And in Science and Health, starting on page 468, line 10, Mary Baker Eddy said it this way, and we all know this one who've been around science, all is infinite mind and its infinite manifestation, for God is all in all.
Yeah.
And then in Mind as the Athlete, again on page 131, you wrote, it's a value for me to pay attention to my perception, to how I'm seeing myself and my world. Perception is reception.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to say from your mouth to God's ear is about 6 inches. 6 inches. All right. So that's a lot of what we've been talking about. So any questions, any comments that you might have, just put those in the comments. We'll look at all of them and respond, even if you're not live. But you're welcome to put them in. It takes a little bit for them to get here. Anything else you want to say on this? So really it's words, language, and our understanding of the God idea. So words are just words. Language is what we can see, hear, taste, feel, touch in the way that we're talking about it.
Okay.
Yeah. And our understanding of the God idea lives in
a note at the end of this. Can I read that?
Yeah. Go for it.
Science is religion's new tongue. God is a term for individual mind. Hence, any thought of a surrender of a supernatural power or of an authority and control outside of individual conscious identity is a denial of the science of being. So we want to see that there isn't any authority or control outside of the consciousness constituting my being right now. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's very good. Anything else you want to say?
Nope.
All right. So what can people do between now and next week?
Look forward to a new session with us.
Pay attention to your seeing.
Of course.
Pay attention to your perception. Pay attention to what you think about what's going on. Are you focused on the stuff of life, or are you focused on the divinity present, sourcing all of it? So start to look, be open. And what you know for sure, that just ain't so. Be open to maybe it just ain't so. What if it's not? Oh my God, then what? So pay attention to that. And we will be here next week on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific and 7 p.m. Central. And hopefully we'll have it also on Facebook. But right now, just YouTube. All right. So take care, and we will see you then.